Hello and welcome to the Sexient Beings Sessions. Today we're going to be talking about play space. And these are the spaces of being able to incorporate kinky play into your romantic partnership or life just in general, but also bringing play in as a mentality, as a state you can drop into on a regular basis, and the importance of that. I'm Alex Pruitt, a certified sex, love, and relationship coach with a BDSM and kink focus. I work with men, women, and couples plus who want to transform their old patterns, pain, and beliefs so they can create thriving relationships that are deeply connected, playful, and fulfilling within themselves and with others. Today, I'm joined by the magnificent Quentin Jameson. If you want to go ahead and introduce yourself, that would be fantastic.
Well, thank you, Alex. My name is Quentin Jameson. I have studied psychology and have always had a passion for that. One of the big things that, like Alex said, that we are going to be discussing today is being able to bring that play space into your regular settings. Because also within play space, it doesn't always have to just be kinky. Because a lot of people think when you start to bring up play, that's what it gets brought to. When I also think of play space, I think of that regular space around and what ways you can bring that smile to your partner's face. So, yeah.
Beautiful, yes. And I do want to delineate that, like, just because somebody is playing in the realm of BDSM and kink, it doesn't mean that it has to involve sex. I actually came across a Reddit post recently where the person was asking if there's any DOMs like who don't require sex or want to build out a relationship before sex gets involved, because this person in particular wanted to wait until marriage before they engaged in those spaces. BDSM and kink does not have to involve sex whatsoever. It is the agreements between the people who are playing together that define if that involves that or not. So,
Exactly. And
just a
that's,
little clarification that it doesn't always mean that there's going to be sex or touching of bits or whatever else.
yeah. I think that is actually leads off on a great kickstart point for with that post. Because you have when you get into an early form of a relationship, not everybody wants to get physical. There's a lot of those spaces where even if you've been in a relationship, people aren't at that physical point. And one of those key play spaces that I've always enjoyed getting to do is like you it's a point of like I said earlier with bringing that smile to somebody's face. So when going through and just trying to brighten their day, and even if it makes them and gets them to that little awkward state of like, oh, you keep on making me smile and making me blush, oh my god, it it brings more of that joy out. It brings more of that reminder to the person that you're doing it to and how much you care about them. And that is also one of those classes that we went to at Kinkfest this year,
Yeah.
um, with the positive affirmation play, because that's essentially what I am talking about. It's a really wonderful thing, and it's something that you can bring in on a daily basis, or even just to here drop this in just to get that person to kind of see what you see at the same point of them like getting to hear that thing and getting to have that little like butt wiggle smile, whatever they do when they have those little happy thoughts come in. It's the same way like when you have really good food and you do the body wiggle, or you are in a kink BDSM and you're doing an impact roll scene, and like that flow goes through your body and you just take that breath. And yeah, so it's a great way to also be able to feel into the body in those senses of play.
Yeah. And that's Quentin brought up the affirmation play. There is all sorts of different BDSM and kink play. It is not just about playing with bondage as far as physically being restrained. It is not just about playing with impact or things that we always think hurt. Like there can be uncomfortable edges for people in playing with affirmation. And so while one person may end up getting what I call tail wags and what Quentin is referring to as the butt wiggles, um, as far as a body response of this like overflowing joy or happiness or excitement in the body, another person with affirmation may have tears come up because it actually goes against the beliefs they have or that have been ingrained within them. And it's all sorts of different ways of playing with a person's edges, right? And that's what I love about the kink and BDSM space in particular is for me it's bringing a conscious awareness to playing with these edges. Again, it not having to be about sex or anything sexual at all. To me, it's about getting into the body and being able to be present in that space and experiencing whatever you're experiencing in that moment and being accepted, acknowledged, understood by a partner in that space.
And well, so even with it, that also expands to more than just pleasure, because being able to keep that playful aspect in a lot of your own scenarios of life
Mhm.
makes it easier to stay in the moment and live in the moment and do the things that are in front of you rather
Yes.
than sitting there and thinking about a million and one different things. Because I know, like, on my personal basis and quite a few different people I know, that once you start getting into your head and you start, uh, it becomes a landslide, like
Mhm.
the boulder, the snowball effect. That's what I was thinking of. Once the snowball effect starts to take place, like it's really hard to like get out of the way on your own. And like when you play with it, okay, the snowball may start, but when you think about somebody that is playing, you think about little kids and they're jumping around and they go side to side. And like, okay, you have these things building up. Start playing with how life is. Play with the things that are around you, and it's gonna help moderate so you can just focus on what's right in front.
Mhm.
It's that's the beautiful thing about play space, and it doesn't just have to be sexual. It has so many different variances. And one of the things I was actually thinking of that I wanted to bring up with you, because I thought, okay, this is actually a really good question. So, play spaces and how they relate to the five love languages. So, for one of the big examples, my how I express love on a very high sense is physical touch, is getting to cuddle up to somebody, getting to tickle them, getting to lick up the side of their face and give a little like nose nuzzle right afterwards. Because it's fun. It's silly and it typically brings that, oh my god, why do you do this? Or like just the giggle right after of like, oh, I knew this was coming. And so it makes me think of like, what ways could you do that in the other senses and how would that come up? And so I just thought for you, you know.
Uh, as a question directly for me of like how can because you just brought up asking about senses, but you also related it to the five love languages, and I don't directly correlate the five love languages to the five senses.
Uh, well, I mean the five love languages, not the five senses. My apologies. Um,
Like, how could you bring that up with like sense of smell, sense of taste, hearing?
no, so the five love languages. So your physical touch,
Mhm.
your um, words of affirmation, gift giving, things like that. How can those correlate to play so you know which ways to best do that for a partner who has a specific love.
Well, so if you are playing with the love languages, right?
Mhm.
Getting clear on what your partner's love languages are
Yeah,
is probably the top thing because each one of us has different ways that we receive and show love. Um,
most
and
definitely.
that's if you're trying to shower your partner in gifts and their like bottom ranked one is receiving gifts for how they receive love, like you're going to be trying to give all this love
And
and it's not something your partner actually receives as love. Like maybe theirs is, I believe, acts of service is one of them. So, like helping out with dishes around the house, or let's say they need to run an errand and they're feeling overwhelmed, and you're like, hey, like I'll do that for you. Um,
yeah, and so what I mean is like with a, I'm going to use gift giving examples. So like let's say you wanted to bring the play space into gift giving. Let's say you do a little scavenger hunt for that person
mhm.
so that they have to go through and do those things. But what if their favorite thing is acts of service? What could you do in that sense, you know?
And again, it comes down really to
The
the
person,
individual person and having dropped into curiosity to find out what those are for them, right?
yeah,
Because even though there are the broader categories of love languages, and one being physical touch, another being acts of service, another being words of affirmation, another gifts, and I can't remember what the fifth one is offhand. Um, but even though there's other broader categories, what actually equal those things are going to still differ for each individual,
exactly. Yeah,
right? So let's say somebody's love language, their top one is receiving gifts, but they hate flowers, and you keep bringing them flowers, and maybe they hate flowers because they're allergic to them, or it reminds them of something like that was a bad memory from when they were younger. Like then continuing to bring them flowers isn't really going to
but as a partner, you are
get
gonna
the end
know
result,
not
right?
to do. You're trying. I'm talking about bringing it into a play space different than like I'm saying. You already like know these things about this individual. Yes,
Hmm.
and you're not just you're. I was just thinking of like different ideas of what those could be for each individual, and that you could add on to a play space with the 5 different love languages. You can add it
Yeah,
into that into your relationship. Um,
yeah.
so I think one of the next like play space topics to kind of talk about is like bringing them actually into the daily dynamic on like what kind if like you want what do you want to bring up with that play space. Does that make sense?
My brain is feeling a little bit confused.
um so when so let's say like we've when you're in a play space because like you
Hmm.
can always play with more than just your joy, your happiness. What if you want to play with somebody in a different sense to kind of bring out different emotions that would be helpful for that person?
Yeah, I would say the top thing is like, especially if you're wanting to do certain emotional play that could be uncomfortable for another person, it's going into like pre-negotiations, right? Of if they're wanting to play with that space, because I personally I don't mind playing with my sadness, playing with my anger, um, playing with disgust or other things. Granted, like it's not always planned on my part for when those things come out. It can be hard to plan that out in some instances. But doing a check in, like if you're wanting to play with something that isn't bringing a partner pleasure in particular, let's say, or joy or happiness, the things that most people like to feel on like a higher level, right? Then doing check ins for what you want to play with and what you want to explore with them
Yeah,
is
and
really, really valuable.
I think that's really good also for a lot of people who are going to end up listening, that checking in with your partner is the key when going into just any play space, whether it's your normal day to day or in a kink and BDSM lifestyle,
Mhm,
because then it allows you to get that information how to make sure they feel safe, and if you're willing to touch those uncomfortabilities, like it's you, like you were just saying, to renegotiate that and to talk about those uncomfortabilities, which that leads into like a big, like, how much is does this person want to talk about it, because it doesn't always have to just be in a relationship, boyfriend girlfriend, or a poly relationship, on how the partnership works. It can be in other senses too, because I have some friends that just don't want to talk about their emotions,
mhm,
and it's like playing into that, like, okay, like, where do you want to, like, what are you willing to talk about? And if they are willing to talk about some stuff, but they're just like, I don't really want to talk about it right now, like, so then you at least know it's on the table.
mhm.
And being able to bring a lighthearted, playful speech to it, and it tends to make it easier for some people to talk about what's going on. Does that make sense?
Y Oh, yeah, no, and that's just to add to that, that's if somebody else is, like, we'll put the opposite of play, which to me is being very serious, right? Or being, like, stuck
Yes.
in being serious. Um, if somebody is stuck in that space and they're like, "I don't wanna talk about it," continuing to push that they have to talk about it or have to communicate that to you is more than likely going to have them shut down more.
Yeah.
If you leave that, like, kind of proverbial door open, being like, "Hey, like, you're important to me. Like, I'm open to talking about this." Or if you're not open to talking about it, that's okay too. I don't see why you would be continuing to push to talk about the thing if you weren't
If,
open to talking about it. But don't take it personally if they like just need to be in their own space with their own seriousness. Go play yourself. Like there are many ways to do that. You can go on a walk. You can go paint, you can go dance. Like you can do many other things than have to let their state overtake where you're at. Like, own your own state. If you are in play, that is okay, but it doesn't mean that your partner or whoever, like, you want to be in play with also has to be there.
yeah, um, that's a really good point on saying that, because one of the things with, like, modern society relationships that happens is a lot of people end up getting in that codependent pattern that the only time you can be happy or have fun or really want to do stuff is when you're with your partner, and you have to be able to have your own sense of play, and keeping
Mhm.
that in yourself and being able to do the things that you want to do, because if you don't, you end up losing yourself in the other person, and that's not what healthy relationships look like. You have to make sure to be doing the things for you, not for somebody else. And that in itself leads to a lot of other aspects in life too.
Well, and I think an important piece here is, right, it's coming back to the foundational piece of being able to connect with play in your life. And there's a lot of instances where that like codependent state you were mentioning comes in where people will start thinking, "Oh, I can only experience this with another person. I can only experience this if I'm taking like this substance." So if we're incorporating drugs and alcohol into this situation,
Right.
um,
Yeah.
as far as the way people tap into play, it's really into any emotions. From my breathwork training in particular, and a lot of the somatic and other embodiment trainings, it goes back to this core concept that if you can feel any of those things, you're able to connect with those feelings, even if it's initially brought up by a situation outside of yourself, that that emotion, that set of feelings, that experience had already existed within you.
Hmm.
Because if it did not, you wouldn't be able to feel it, experience, be it. And in that sense, that means that, like, let's say I keep having little kids flash to mind because I was doing some work at a school earlier. Um, but let's say Timmy, right, is your best friend and the person you play with all the time. I mean, you could relate this to a partnered relationship as well. And that's when
Yeah.
you're with Timmy, you're able to tap into those spaces. Well, the thing is, you can tap into that sort of play and those feelings and those emotions that get instigated in those spaces with Timmy without him being there. And so, especially if you're finding that like you're only able to tap into those with another person, like just take a look for yourself at what things you want to play with. And this is something that I don't think a lot of people end up questioning for themselves. And it's really coming back to like, what sort of things like can I do on my own that I really enjoy, that have me just feel in the moment, in play, that have me be curious about life. Like maybe one of your forms of play is listening to podcasts or audiobooks because it starts sparking new questions, new concepts, and again, tapping you into curiosity. And that's for me one of my foundations as far as getting into play and bringing myself to these points of play no matter what I'm doing, is getting fucking curious as shit about it.
Yeah. Well, and curiosity is the core of play to begin with, if you think about it.
Yes, and
Because
that's that is why my top recommendation will always be like get fucking curious.
yeah. Well, sorry, I had my cat walk across my phone.
It's okay. He's just wanting to play too.
um, yeah. Well, okay, and that's also another aspect of play, and we've talked about having that play in your life, and it's also a point of people always think of play with just other humans for a lot of it. Um, with being like an animal owner, you have to make sure that they have their level of play and their toys because it brings that intelligence to them and it makes it so they're not as bored and destructive. And that, in a sense, will show you on your own way, like what things they like to do and how to do that with them too. Because I know one of my favorite dogs in the world. I just walk in and look at her and go, squeakers! And her butt goes all bouncing, and she's really excited to see me with one word and give her all the love. And it brings that joy and that happiness to me. And like we were talking about how children is you were talking about how like children were brought up to mind with playing with little Timmy and like what those emotions and what you were feeling during that to be able to bring that into your own life if you're having a hard time. And it makes me also think about like making sure to show other people that play because sometimes not everybody has learned it and they have a hard time with connecting to their own sense of play, especially when like people get older. Some people have a lot of trauma around that sense and
Hmm.
not feeling safe in it. And it's just making sure to be able to let them come to you on that wavelength of like, yes, this is something like I'm willing to try.
Hmm.
And it's it's one of those things too where like you as a guy, I have noticed back when I was dating very commonly, um, I'd meet partners who wouldn't be into kink and BDSM, and it was due to very negative experiences in the past. And I always told them, like, if you want to express this and like maybe go down this way or just want to learn about it, I'm here to talk about it, but I'm never going to be like, hey, like we should do this, we should do this, we should do this, because then it takes away that consent. And like once there's that no put down, it's understanding that no, and it also allows them to be curious and like, okay, well, what is this in a positive sense? How can this be better? And like it's also in those points as a dom to have a very heavy level of aftercare, because if they've never experienced something like that to begin with, like, and aftercare doesn't just connect to kink BDSM, but so many other aspects of life. I'm just using it, talking about it in this sense right now,
Mhm.
uh, because it's going to be a completely new, altered space for them where they've been able to connect to that interesting, dark, playful, hot, whatever is coming up for them in those moments. And it's going to be the first time they've been able to connect to that and be vulnerable, not only with another person, but with themselves in those moments. And it's one of those beautiful things of kink and BDSM, but also just being a playful spirit in my own life is like having that curiosity to give other people those first experiences, but also have those first positive experiences for myself, because I've had a lot of trauma in my own life, both regular and sexual trauma. And it's one of those things where like play has gotten me through a lot of it. Um,
Mhm.
it was really hard for me as a kid to, after I had a major death in my family, it became very hard for me to kind of be that kid again, to be in that sense of play. And the biggest thing I found myself doing was writing, because that's what connected to me to my imagination, my creativity after that, and my curiosity, because I got curious about what I could write about, what depth could I get this to, could I ever get something published. And that's why I've been going back to my writing again. And
Mhm.
a beautiful it's a beautiful place of play within myself. And that leads back to being able to play with others, is having that play within yourself and continuing that play.
Yeah, and that's, I guess, one thing that keeps popping for me
Yeah.
is that for whatever reasons with, I don't know if it's our society, the modeling that comes across from adults as we're younger, um, but I always got the impression that, like, adults or, like, being an adult meant being very serious, right? This is
Yeah.
some
Oh,
narrative that came across at some point in
oh,
time in my life, and the thing is with being an adult and being in that very serious mode, one of the things I've noticed is it tends to relate pretty highly to being in a survival state of or constantly like being in some like hyper vigilance, um, just state
constant
of
stress.
watchfulness and guardedness within your system. And so when I talk about play a lot of the time, to me, play are those spaces, and it's very similar to what I would consider a meditative space because you are literally living in the moment now. You're not focused on the future and living in anxiety. You're not focused on the past and being depressed, right, and overwhelmed by old feelings, old experiences. You're able to just be present with what's going on right now. And there's a level of freedom and being carefree and lighthearted in
Yeah.
that space that is really hard to connect with if you are constantly serious. Because when you're in that, again, survival mode, you're worried about the future, you're worried about the past. You're anxious about the future, worried about the past, and it's hard to just be here now with what's going on. And so, one of my big recommendations, I mean, if you are younger, still more connected to like your child sense, it's a little bit easier to connect with play. If you found you're having a really hard time or like are noticing, I feel like I'm stuck in just being serious a lot of the time. One of the biggest things you can start to do is to work with like allowing your self space to actually relax. And again, it comes back to being in play spaces that can allow you that relaxation, but maybe to start, this looks like, again, going on a walk. Like, and as you go on that walk, like, notice the trees, like, notice fine detail of the trees. I remember a point about 6 years ago, I was going through like this big state of transition and I started noticing trees again. And I realized in that phase of my life that I had learned to identify trees as this like big green blob on top and a brown stalk below.
Yeah.
But I never actually like paid attention to the detail, and I actually got myself to where again I was tapping into like this curiosity within myself and I could actually notice every leaf on that tree. And then that coming together to make the whole of a tree, the detail in the bark, the color variation between leaves and the bark and textures and things like that. But allowing yourself to notice, oh, I've started to apply filters. And it's again tapping into that curiosity to say, and what else is there? What
Yeah.
what have I been tuning out, filtering out? And that's if you go check out my content, that's you'll find a lot of stuff, especially in my earlier content, where it's me talking a lot about these filters or different lenses that we end up applying. And it's a survival mechanism that we all create as we grow and we're taught into. So it's kind of like I think there's a saying from like Buddha, right? Of like when we're all born, we're born a Buddha. Like babies innately are constantly just in the moment. Granted, they're pooping on themselves and everybody else is having to take care of all their needs for them.
But
But
all they
they're,
have the awareness for is that moment.
yes, exactly. And that's where if you are around younger kids, like they can be such a great teacher to be around because you get to see them just in these high states of curiosity and play and openness to the world. And
Yeah.
it's really fucking phenomenal.
I think that's definitely a beautiful thing about kids, and just that pureness of play, because once you get older you have to tap into that, and you have
Mhm.
to be more conscious about it, and it just comes with such a fluid state when you're younger, and it just like it's weird to look back and one day and be like, wow, I have to actually like make my time, or like consciously think about doing this, mm, until you make it a habit, you know?
Mhm.
So it's just very interesting to think on that. You think you keep talking about living in the moment, and that is the a huge thing with talking about play. Um, and that's one of the wonderful things that Jerry Garcia from the Grateful Dead, they he always talked about living in the moment, and unfortunately, like his moment that he decided to live in was in a heroin addiction, and he kept on being stuck in that moment, wanting to feel that high. And it's the point of like a lot of the other members of the band, like they don't do anything anymore because like they've had their fun, they lived in that moment, but that is no longer their moment. They have to take care of themselves, and they have
Mhm.
to continue to go forward. And that's a big part that, like, when you're in an addictive pattern, you can't stop thinking, because like you only want that moment to stay that moment, and once the high is gone, you want that moment back,
Yeah.
and you're just wanting to get back to that moment. And like, yeah, you can think about all these other things, and like meth heads, for example, they will do oh so many fucking things, run around, do their stuff, but they're always in that moment of whatever they're tweaked out on. And like when you are on a downer, you're pulling yourself out of that moment to kind of just be there and to feel that high.
Yeah.
It's interesting, because then you also have senses of like people who go on extreme sexual adventures to see everything that they can feel, and it coming to a point of like an overload in their system, and then they want to go back to that because they're like, okay, I now figured it out. And yes, that is a great thing to go back. And so like, let's say you do something that really put your body through way too much, and then you're like, I want to do this again because I've already done it once. There's the potential of that risk of your body not being okay with it. And yes, it's okay to like want to do these things, but think about also how that is going to affect your body in that moment, because that is a huge thing with being present in the moment.
Mhm.
So, and connecting to that, you were talking about finally being able to see the trees, and they were just big green blobs on brown sticks. And I completely understand that, because I've had those moments in my life to where I've been so dissociated, like I don't realize the finer details of things around me. And that's one of the big things societally as well. It's like people don't look and really see what is in front of them. And sometimes it's harder for the people who see everything that's in front of them, because
Yeah,
then
and
they're
it's
too
finding a
overloaded.
balance.
It's exactly, it's where that's exactly what I was getting to, is finding that balance of just being able to breathe that moment in. I you so you talk about being able to see the trees for the first time, and I remember the first time, like, it felt like I took the glasses off when I was younger, and then like a handful of years later where another filter came off. And like the first one when I was younger was I'd really, there was a lot of bullshit that had happened in my house when I was younger, but what really at that point in time was seeing a lot of like the craziness and the underbelly of Portland, and seeing what the madness is, and being like, oh well, yeah, this is definitely some shit. This is what more of life actually looks like. And seeing a lot more of people's true identities as well. It was interesting because it wasn't always in a negative sense of like seeing people's identities, but it was in the positive sense of being able to see who I did and did not want around in my life, because of them not being able to drop into that play space, because it was always so serious.
Mhm.
And it's one of those things, like when you talked about, when you get older, you just get so serious, and you get so serious about everything that you you just can't connect. You don't know how anymore. And
Yeah.
it's it's really sad that society's gotten like that, because I think that is a huge societal thing. Is once you get older, you have to be on top of your stuff. The American nuclear family, uh, you have to get a trade as a guy, go into the military, or you need to be in school for something big with money. and if you're doing anything else, you're a loser. Like those were the main things distilled into a lot of young men in the world, and it was very hard for myself growing like hearing that always, because that just made me go, no, I'm not doing that. I'm not
Mhm.
going to be another fill in. I'm not just going to be another cog in the wheel, because I still held on to that play space. I held on to that point of me, and I'm glad I did, because even to this day, I can still drop into that play space, have my fun,
Yeah.
and do the things I want to do. Um, so it's definitely, play space is just beautiful, and yeah,
So I do want to talk a little bit because I did
yeah.
mention it in the description, and it's on the topic, but a different branch for sure. Um, but there, especially for people wanting to get into BDSM and kinky play or play that would fall outside of vanilla, more so with a partner that they have had an existing relationship with. If they're wanting to start branching out into exploring different kinky things, and let's say with their partner, let's say they're in a monogamous relationship, do you have any recommendations on initiating those conversations, how they can start opening up these spaces to start exploring?
So the first thing with that is kind of thinking about what you want as an individual. So let's say as the guy in the relationship, like one of the things I'm interested in starting doing is like spanking, and like one of the big stuff shown, like you want spanking, paddling, and like maybe learn how to use a flogger. You're gonna want to like look up what it actually what it actually like means to use these things, different impact areas, like the safety stuff, and have an understanding for it first before you're gonna want to like go in and have that conversation with this other person, because there's a chance that you may like get into reading these and realize like, okay, this, I don't think that thing is actually for me. um, and then once getting to that point of like, okay, I've decided, I have this information, like let's see what my partner is curious about with this. And it's a point of like asking, it's really hard to ask those questions, but maybe I think my best way to bring it up would be probably during a play space, not necessarily to bring, don't bring those things in immediately, but bring up like, would you like to try some things soon? And then like after the play space, continue to have that conversation, and then once the next day, like have those negotiations and be like, hey, so we talked about this, like I'm wondering if you would be actually, like you actually want to do this and you're interested in this,
Mhm.
and getting that full confirmation, doing negotiations and being like, okay, well, let's try this, and definitely taking your time with it. And because you don't want, especially if it's something you're very excited, you want to do this, take your time with it. And I'm saying this from experience of like, don't just jump full fledged, because you can get yourself hurt or hurt other people. And that is not just in the physical sense, that can be also in the emotional sense. And when you get into that realm of BDSM in play, there is those levels of education you need to look into for your safety, and being able to know what is okay and what is not okay. Look up local munches. Even if you're in a monogamous relationship, go and at least meet some people, because then you can have conversation. And if like that makes you uncomfortable, there's plenty of forums of people who are willing to talk about this. There's coaches who would talk about this. There's all sorts of different resources in this wonderful world of new age internet that we have, you know? So I think that would be my key way of like bringing that up, especially like if it is something you are very curious in. Now, if it is something that you are hearing from your partner that they're very curious in, and you're not sure how you feel about it, but you're interested in it, like as the male perspective, maybe bring that out on a special night and be like, hey, so I know you were very interested on this anniversary, Valentine's Day, just something a little different, or just like a special night and be like, hey, we're gonna have a good date night this coming week. I really want to like pamper you, do some things for you, and to be able to hold that space for that person. Because when going into that, you can also gauge how like you are feeling, and also be like, how are you liking tonight? Like, and get those check-ins with that other person. Um, as obviously, I can't really talk on the female role or
Mhm.
submissive role on that side. So, what would you say on those aspects?
So I would say the one difference that stands out to me for what I would prefer, and this is just it's based on creating more spaces of like curiosity and based
Yeah,
on experiences I have had specifically with men as tops or doms in that leader space, where I have had them bring up an idea for play during a play scene that I was either unfamiliar with or like initially it was just them like mentioning it, right? During that play space. It may be something where I'm like, yeah, cool, like that's something to explore, but I'm not a full yes to it. Well,
yeah, and
they will
that's
take any indication of a yes as a yes and then proceed in that
and
play
that
space.
and that is
So,
where I was saying earlier
yeah,
that you don't bring it up in that at that first play space where you talk about it. Like you bring it up, and then you continue that conversation on later, because then it does bring that curiosity up of like, okay, am I actually interested in this? And it gives you that you can give that full consent.
yeah. Well, and that's, I guess, part of my recommendation with this, and this is from a very personal experience, was I had a past partner who was into like incest and age play, which is fine. Like, there's nothing wrong with him being interested in that. And as soon as I like kind of gave the like half yes answer, it became okay, we're going into this now. Like that was the
That's
green
not
light
okay.
for him. Well, but just listen, right? Where like but in that moment of him asking, where it gave him a green light, for me, it actually had me pull out of my experience and go more into my head because this is a situation I'm not 100% a yes to. And so even if we hadn't gone into that play right in that moment, it still would have been something that like all of a sudden pulled me out of my head and was like, "Oh, what what's going on now?"
Yeah,
Right?
and
For what this person is wanting. And that's where I personally prefer the state of like outside of something that is a designated sexual play space of like being like, hey, like this thing has been, it's a curiosity of mine. Like I'd really like to start exploring this and and check in with your partner on if that's something they're interested in exploring too. Like finding out, is it a hard no, right? Which would be the hard
yeah,
limit. Is it
and that's
something that would be a soft limit, which a soft limit is typically there's a hesitation about it. And if the person has enough trust, enough safety, and enough knowledge for them going forward, then it can become a yes. It's not just a hard no, it's completely off the table. There's nothing wrong, again, if that was a hard no for the person. It's just having the space for
Yeah,
me outside of a defined play space
define
to start
sexual.
exploring that, right? To do the initial inquiries. And that's where I really love, um, I call it a BDSM checklist. I have one that I provide in my Sovereign Nom program, and it's literally a very extensive spreadsheet of all sorts of varieties of kinky and BDSM play. And then it has little fillable fields next to it. And it's based on what's your experience level with this, being no experience all the way to incredibly experienced. What's your interest, right? Is this just a hard no? Is it a soft limit? Is it a yes, definitely, I'm totally 100% in? And then you get to gauge for yourself. You get to explore one, things you've probably already had experience in, even if you're in the vanilla world or would consider yourself vanilla. Two, things you've considered or heard about, but like haven't necessarily thought about for yourself if it's something you want to explore. And third, you're going to come across a whole lot on those lists that incorporates nothing you've ever heard of or considered.
Oh yeah,
And but it gives you this like wide variety to be like, oh, what am I interested in exploring? What are those hard no's? Like it is very important to know your hard no's in spaces. Like if you don't want to be cut during a scene and have blood in that exchange, like that's
yeah, that
important
is
to
very
know,
hard. And
right?
so one of the things with what I was talking about earlier and bringing that up is definitely it's a huge timing thing. Like know your the time and place when to bring something, especially if it is a heavier topic with certain kink and BDSM that could bring up a lot of triggers or puts that free state in the other person.
Well, and I
And
do want to clarify here that a trigger for another person, and let's say again that you have been what you would define as fairly vanilla relationships, could
yes,
be anything that falls outside of vanilla relationships. A trigger doesn't have to come from like
a
you
trigger
have
could come from
personally
a
had a bad experience with this thing. Like maybe you heard from somebody at some point in time that like little play is really inappropriate and terrible, and like you just took that on as a belief in your system.
yeah.
It doesn't mean there aren't ways that that can happen in safe, healthy, consensual relationships. It just means like you got input that there was a bad experience somewhere and your nervous system said, "Oh, these are all unsafe," or "None of these are okay." Um, I do want to say, like, BDSM and kink can bring up a lot of those. That's sexuality and those sorts of spaces that get lumped with it, even if sex is not involved, have been marked as very like taboo and outside the normal for a very long time by a very conservative society. It doesn't mean that there's anything wrong with those desires or wanting to play in those spaces, but it can bring up more for individuals. And that's where creating, getting, gaining knowledge, finding resources, finding classes, especially if you're wanting to play with like breath play, needles, fire, any of the things that could cause significant damage to another person's physical or emotional body, right? Like gain knowledge, start educating yourself, especially if you're very new to this space.
Yeah, and that is one of the things I definitely said earlier is make sure you are knowledgeable in what you're doing so you do
Hmm.
not hurt somebody.
Yeah. Yeah, and it can very well be that let's say you're in a relationship and again, let's say it's been a long-term relationship, you guys have been together for 10 years and you're starting to find that like, oh, this piques my interest. Like again, there's nothing wrong with wanting to play in those spaces. Nothing at all. But like take your time. Like you're not going to just be perfect and know how to do all the things right off the bat. You can think about it like going and learning a sport, right? Like if you go to play a game of soccer and you've never stepped on a soccer field before, like you don't know the rules of that game. You may not know that like you're not supposed to touch the ball with your hands unless you're the goalie, right? There are things to learn in that space, skills to adapt, but it doesn't mean you can't play those. Just don't expect yourself to be perfect with it right off the bat. I will say this idea that we have to be perfect in what we're doing is very much so a survival response and related to the like I have to be serious piece.
Yeah. Well, that's about the time almost.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Today, I think we covered quite a bit of topics. I definitely appreciate you having me on here. I think one of the last things I want to say just about play space in general. Don't be scared of it. And to understand that play spaces come in all forms, so many different ways. And to just make sure to embrace and live in that moment and to be happy with the people that you are with that in that moment. If you are with anybody else, if you're alone or if you're with your animal, enjoy those. Because when it comes to the end of the day, like materialistic items, they come and they go. But those spaces of play and those happiness, that's those are the things that are going to be holding on to the end.
Mm-hmm.
And you don't want to live a life and look back and be like, I was angry a lot of the time. I was so serious. You want to look back and be able to say, I played. I had a lot of fun. Like, I didn't have to take everything so serious. And I loved the people that I was around. Yeah.
Yeah. And I, again, coming back to like the core foundations of being able to be in play, it's coming back to a sense of curiosity, stepping out of judgment. We get really good, especially again with that curiosity or the not curiosity, the serious mode of labeling things as good or bad, right? And when we do that, we end up limiting and like rejecting certain pieces of our experience as not being valuable. And there is value in every single one of our experiences, whether we label them as being enjoyable or not.
Yeah.
So it's try to step out of that labeling of things are good or bad. That can be its whole own big awakening journey all on its own. But it can be a really fun one. Again, it's about allowing yourself to get into play with it. I really want to thank you for joining me today, Quentin. I definitely enjoy playing in this space with other people and having it be more of a conversation than just me rambling for an hour of time on said topic. So thank you again. If anyone is interested in working with me through coaching, then there is a link down below in the description or in the about section on YouTube. I'm also highly curious, like, what ways do you want to start incorporating play into your life? And like, how can you do that either with your partner or on your own? And whatever your answer is, go ahead and comment it down below. And I will see you next time. Thank you again, Quentin.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Yep.